Thank you very much. It's indeed a great pleasure to be here. And it's also a difficult act to follow after Pierre presented a lot of important statistics and Thomas was speaking about very important topics such as the intergenerational solidarity and justice, something we as representatives of young people care very much about. And just to say in the beginning, to dispel one myth that exists that people think that if you get rid of older workers, that this automatically creates jobs for newbies. And we have worked together with several institutions knowing that that's not the case. So I just wanted to dispel that in the beginning. As was announced, I'm representing the European Youth Forum, which is a platform of youth organizations in Europe. Europe meaning, for us, of course, the Council of Europe geographically. We have member organizations from countries such as Iceland and Azerbaijan and everything in between in terms of national youth councils that we represent, but also international youth organizations that are interest-based, such as Scouts, Girl Guides, political youth organizations, Young European Federalists, or Young Farmers. So it's a really broad and varied representation what we have, and I will give some of the pointers more oriented towards the future, but start with some broad statements. The most obvious one is that we use almost too many times is Europe is at a crossroads. We've been saying that. I've been involved since 2002, and we've always been saying Europe is at a crossroads. But why is it this time specifically at a crossroads? Well, it's because of the economic and financial crisis that is hitting very hard with strong impact on European citizens in general, but especially on young people's life. At long term, there's obviously a clear shift that we're experiencing in Europe at the moment in terms of demography. But it's not a baby boom. What we are experiencing is a shift towards an aging population, which I'm not saying that is necessarily a bad thing, but it's a fact. It's a fact that this means that there's more burden on the younger generation, there's more expectations on the younger generation, and I'm very happy that this year, during the year of active aging, we have been discussing what the value is of the aging population who still have a lot to contribute to the society. So it's not something that we shift off and say, now you're done and it's up to the new ones to take over. That's definitely not the case. I think there's a role for everyone to play in the society, especially when you have the times of crisis. Everybody needs to stick together. So that's important to say. But yes, youth is in a specific situation. We are much more in the forefront lately as a topic, as an age group. It feels a bit like in the end of the 1960s, even though I was born much after that. But it feels the same sense of we are there, but then it's a lack of interpretation of who is allowed to speak on their behalf, who is the person who will, I mean, even including myself, I speak on behalf of the organized youth, and then there's a lot of young people out there who have a say, who want to have a say, who want to be listened to, and we have the official channels of representation of young people the way we have democracy in Europe in terms of representative democracy, and we are one channel, and we are listened to, but we are not always taken into account, and that's, I think, an important difference. We can be very happy as youth representatives that we are embedded in the structures that Pat Cox mentioned, the structured dialogue in the EU, the co-management system in the Council of Europe. We have come a long way of including and involving youth and young people in society. But the question is, when it comes to the hard questions of the financial crisis, where it's about where do you make the cuts, then yes, we have things to say, we give our own suggestions, but are we really taking into account? Not really. We have seen, and Pierre mentioned, education is something that is very, very important, but we also see that the countries most hit by the crisis are cutting in education, are cutting in social programs. Those are the things that allow this net of social fiber to persist. And Greece is not cutting in arms, and it still has one of the biggest standing armies within the EU. It's cutting in education and social welfare. So that's something where we as young people would want to have a new dialogue on what is needed and what can be done. It's also true that today young people have a lot of opportunities. We hear that all the time, and it's true. We also have the situation of being youth longer. And so it's a never-ending discussion about the definition of youth. We don't have a comprehensive definition of youth anywhere in the world. In the UN, it's deemed from 14 to 24. In the EU, if you look at the programs that we have, it's from 16 or even earlier in some 13 to 30. In some countries, At 24, I'm considered old. In some countries, at 30, I'm still very young. But I know that our colleague at the panel will think about this topic and will bring us a bit more philosophical explanation of these implications of youth. We also have the opportunity in terms of easier access to longer education. We have more opportunities to study, especially abroad, thanks to the Erasmus program, thanks to the opportunities of an integrated European Union. We have very high level of qualification nowadays as a current generation. We have the possibility to organize ourselves, get active, thanks to a vivid civil society and a network of youth organizations from local to European level. They do the kind of things that Thomas Mann was mentioning, going out after school, engaging in voluntary activities, using peer-to-peer education with each other, but also catering for the needs of others, like the elders or other groups, socially excluded ones. And there are structures in place and funding available for them to organize activities and projects. That's great, and we are or have been privileged in that sense for a long time. However, there are also unprecedented challenges. And despite those positives in terms of opportunities, because of the crisis and because of the developments since 2008 in particular, we are seeing situations of this generation that no post-war generation has seen. We have youth unemployment rates that is currently at 22.8% of average in the EU, with 4 countries hitting much over. You have Greece and Spain over 50%. That's every second young person unemployed. That's crazy. In September 2012, 5.5 million young persons under 25 were unemployed in the EU 27, which is proud to be the area of prosperity and peace. And that gives a lot of food for thought of where we are today. And it's really a reality hitting you in the face of where we are. 3.4 million are in the euro area. That's the EU 17, what some would like to see as the core of Europe. In some countries, as I mentioned, it's even worse. Young people, consequences of the crisis and austerity today already are being more and more exposed to poverty and social exclusion. We have the so-called needs, not in education, not in training. It's now very common to talk about these needs. And it's quite sad that we need to approach this topic in that way, that we have unprecedented levels of, on one hand, the best qualified generation ever. At the same time, we have so many people who are in the lower ranks, and we saw the statistics before. Of course, this is not only as the result of an economic crisis, this is also a result of a general structural problem young people have because they face difficulties in transition from education to the labour market all over Europe. Pierre Marais was speaking about the emphasis in the beginning of how important it is to focus on the access to the labour market and to identify what are the missing skills, where is the skills mismatch that we talk about. And of course, for us as European Youth Forum, this is something we really look into as well. We are aware that we have a responsibility as organized youth to reach out to more young people to understand their needs, but also we are developing and devising our own policies how we can contribute to overcoming this. And for us, one thing that was maybe a bit missing from Pierre Marais' presentation, even though I know that he's very committed to this, is the non-formal education aspect. So education in a holistic sense, to look at how the things that young people do, what they do outside of formal schooling, actually gives them certain competences that are needed for the 21st century. Because at the moment the situation is, and this has been identified as a problem, the current schooling system is not adequate everywhere to give the skills that are needed for the labour market. And at the moment what we are doing, we are acquiring those skills elsewhere. Yes, it's true. I'm fortunate enough to speak 8 languages, but that's thanks to the opportunities that I was given through the different EU programs, such as Youth in Action. It allowed me to go and live in Barcelona for 1 year and learn Spanish and learn Catalan and exchange with my colleagues and peers. So I made use of the opportunities given, but all that was outside of formal schooling. In Slovenia, I never it was good enough system in Slovenia that I have 2 languages throughout high school and university. But still, it's something that we managed to get through exchange with our colleagues. in the European settings, through moving around, through being mobile. Those are the kind of things that help you truly understand and have the practice of learning a language. Because you cannot learn, I mean, you can learn the basics in the school, but you actually need to interact with someone. You need to get confidence to be able to speak a language. You need to be autonomous as a person to be able to fulfill your dreams. So, despite of being more prepared, young people face growing difficulties to get into the labor market. And it's really highlighting the challenges that are existing in terms of transition phase as well as job creation. So I want to speak a little bit about towards a job-rich recovery. It's a big question mark for us in the EU. I hear constantly a lot of very good words from our leaders about how the EU will tackle youth unemployment. But one thing that I think is a bit misleading is, personally, I do not want or need the EU to give me a job. I don't think that's the task of the EU to give me a job. What the task of the EU is to provide a framework in which young people will have the opportunities and the rights, starting by fully exercising the rights that they should have as EU citizens to be mobile, because at the moment we know that young Bulgarians and young Romanians, even though EU citizens, do not have the chance to work in Brussels, for example, according to the rules that are in place due to transition and all the other decisions. I've been personally affected by that as a Slovenian who got a job in Brussels and couldn't come and work here, and I had to make myself self-employed or independent in order to be able to move here without going outside of the EU to Croatia to get a work permit, which I, as a matter of principle, didn't want to do. So these are the kind of things that can be done. But what is more important is for the EU to relaunch its future on the basis of innovation, cohesion, and youth. Youth is a resource for the EU and for every country. We always hear this, you are the future. It's true, we are the future, but mostly we are the present. And I like the English word present because it's a gift, it's a present for the future. But of course, it doesn't mean that automatically this present will be a valuable contribution for the future if you don't invest in this present, if you don't invest in youth here and now. And what does this mean? It means investing in better transition and contributing to better youth employment. Thomas Mann was mentioning a very important topic, youth guarantee. This is something that yesterday the Commissioner Andor launched a youth employment package, which includes a youth guarantee, which includes elements of catering for the needs of quality internships or apprenticeships. It includes some other initiatives, and that's something we have been calling for since 2008. We've been saying that youth guarantee, as is in place in certain countries, is a good model to cater for these needs. And as was stated, it's not something that is an automatism. It's not automatically giving, it's not the nanny state that some might portray it. It's about giving fair chances to everyone and catering for those with specific needs. Internships are an important element that can contribute to developing new skills on the ground, to understand the functioning of an institution better, but if they are not provided for in the sense of getting recognized, if it's not part of the educational system, you don't get basic health insurance, you don't get anything for it, then you're in a precarious situation and in a vicious circle of moving from one internship to another. That's why that needs to be tackled as well. And we have contributed to a European Quality Charter on internship and apprenticeships, which is something that now the Commission is taking on and creating something. We need to create jobs for young people and invest in employment, and the way out of the crisis lies in creating new growth following a socially and environmentally more sustainable development model. Entrepreneurship that was mentioned and the green economy have a huge potential and importance for youth employment, and we very much favour that. However, it cannot be just the answer to everything. The solution is not that everybody becomes self-employed or entrepreneurs, but, as always, it's about giving the chance, informing about the possibility, and catering for fairness in that approach. But what is also needed to tackle the crisis is a stronger and more democratic union. It's true that young people are usually the ones less represented in European elections, and that's something we want to attack in the sense of working towards improving that situation. But the good news is that those young people who have been involved in, for example, youth in action activities, those tend to go out and vote because they understand the importance of the European Union, the importance of working together. So the way out of the crisis requires more European leadership and not less. And by European leadership, I would like to see European leadership in the Parliament, the Commission, and the Council, the EU institutions, not necessarily European leadership of member states behind closed doors. That's an important element. So we also need a European Union with competences that matches current challenges, the way we need young people's competence to match the needs of the labour market if they want to go onto it, to tackle something. So the EU should be given the ability to raise its own resources through direct taxation on such things as environmental impact or through a European financial transaction tax and invest them in youth. The Eurozone should be strengthened and Eurobonds should be created to avoid that prohibitive costs of debt would prevent certain member states and EU from acting. And in parallel, more citizens' participation to decision-making is needed, with transnational European elections and more direct democracy mechanisms, as well as stronger youth representation in political and civil society forums. The future of Europe lies in working more closely together while ensuring a stronger democratic control of the EU institutions and a stronger ownership by the citizens. What we also need to do is to change the current dynamics and offer a fair deal across generations. Solving the crisis is one thing, but avoiding the next one is a completely different story. So in the longer term, it is crucial that the EU adopts more sustainable policies in the sense of greener, fairer Europe, guaranteeing equal opportunities to all young people. And the member states should reduce their debt and strive for positive and long-run balanced budgets without undermining the welfare state, because it's their responsibility towards the new generations to ensure that they are not carrying all the burden of this. And we need to ensure that the European labour market that was developed is equal and inclusive towards all young people, and that the social model, or the social models, because we have at least 3 within the EU, are preserved and oriented towards giving similar rights from one generation to another. It's not a competition between us, it's about working together, but being fair to each other and recognizing each other's needs. And to come slowly to a conclusion, it's important to speak about, given the EU is getting the Nobel Peace Prize, if the Europe can be an ideal again, is it still motivating in the same sense as it used to the generations in the past to get peace, prosperity, and all these things? Because most of the young people in the EU, especially those in the West, coming from Slovenia, I still remember wars. But if you were born in France after the 1980s or early 90s, you don't know what it means to have a war. You don't see the need for peace in the same understanding as the previous generations have. So we need to continue to live up to the standards that we have set ourselves. The EU has become a defender of human rights and has built on the values of democracy and the rule of law. But we need to also make sure that this is done internally, that we allow ourselves to attack the member states that are not living up to the standards that they have signed up to. Otherwise, our credibility suffers, not only in the eyes of the world, where we try to be a player, but most importantly, in the eyes of the citizens to which we are accountable. So, in conclusion, the EU should concentrate on the place of young people in society, the same way that it caters for the needs of others, but it has to have now an emphasis of what it means for a young person to become autonomous and share the burden of society. Young people cannot continue to be at the heart of worries now and bear the cost of the current system for the next 50 years. This needs to be changed. Not making youth a priority of future decision will be costly, both at human, social and economic levels. And it is essential that the EU mainstreams youth in all the resources, either financial or political, and that the Union has support to the autonomy and the rights of young people that are not contradicting the others, because we know the rights-based approach is something that doesn't mean that you take away anything from the majority if you give rights to minority. It's a complementary thing, but something that needs a debate on. And young people's right to be young citizens now is very important and understated, because we are constantly being looked at the moment as only future workers, future pensioners, future consumers, future bearers or future decision makers. But we need to reaffirm that we are fully embedded in the society now, and that kids as well as young people have a say here and now for their future. Thank you very much.